Most ADHD strategies focus almost entirely on the frontal lobe, the part of the brain responsible for focus, planning, organization, and impulse control. And while the frontal lobe absolutely matters, one of the most powerful and overlooked brain regions in ADHD is actually the cerebellum. And racket sports like tennis, pickleball, squash, badminton, or ping pong may be one of the most effective and enjoyable ways to support and train it. If you've ever noticed that your focus, mood, or mental clarity feels better after playing one of these sports, that's not a coincidence. There's a real neurological reason for that. Let's start with what the cerebellum actually does. The cerebellum is often described as the brain's coordination center, but that description barely scratches the surface. It plays a major role in balance, posture, timing, accuracy, eye movement, and visual tracking. It also helps to regulate rhythm, sequencing, and how smoothly the brain transitions from one task to the next. In many ways, it helps the brain organize action. One of the cerebellum's most important roles is prediction. It helps the brain anticipate what's about to happen and make rapid, precise adjustments in real time before a conscious thought even kicks in. That prediction piece is critical. The cerebellum runs what's known as a feed-forward loop. Instead of reacting after something happens, it helps the brain prepare ahead of time. And this loop has strong direct connections to the frontal lobe, the part of the brain responsible for executive function, focus, emotional regulation, and decision making. When the cerebellum is working efficiently, the frontal lobe doesn't have to work as hard. Focus feels smoother, transitions are easier, tasks feel less mentally exhausting, there's less friction just getting started. Now here's where ADHD comes in. Research consistently shows that people with ADHD tend to have smaller cerebellar volume, as well as reduced cerebellar activation and weaker connectivity between the cerebellum and frontal brain regions. In other words, the cerebellum in ADHD is often structurally and functionally less efficient at doing its job. Because of this, the frontal lobe is forced to compensate, and that compensation comes at a cost. When the frontal lobe has to work overtime to make up for weaker cerebellar input, it leads to mental fatigue, distractibility, impulsivity, poor emotional regulation, and a feeling of constant cognitive effort. This is one reason why so many people with ADHD feel mentally exhausted just trying to stay on track. Clinically, this often shows up as clumsiness, poor timing, difficulty with visual tracking, trouble coordinating movement, and feeling fried or overwhelmed by the end of the day, even without doing anything particularly demanding. This is why strengthening cerebellar function is such a critical and often overlooked piece of ADHD management. Now, this is where racket sports become incredibly powerful. Every single rally demands cerebellar engagement. Every time you anticipate a shot, track a moving ball with your eyes, adjust your posture, shift your weight, and time your movement, you're directly activating cerebellar circuits. This isn't passive movement, it's layered, real-time brain training. You're combining balance, coordination, visual tracking, timing, prediction, and rapid error correction all at once. And the cerebellum thrives on this type of complex and skill-based movement. Over time, this kind of training improves cerebellar efficiency. Movements become smoother, timing improves, prediction improves, and because of that feed-forward loop, stronger cerebellar signaling helps the frontal lobe function more efficiently as well. Clinically, this often translates into improvements in executive function, things like planning, organization, task initiation, follow-through, and cognitive flexibility. It can also support emotional regulation, reaction time, processing speed, working memory, and overall mental endurance. Many people notice they feel calmer, but also sharper and less scattered. On top of that, racket sports are aerobic. Aerobic movement increases dopamine and norepinephrine, two neurotransmitters that are commonly dysregulated in ADHD. But what makes this especially powerful is that you're not just getting a short-term chemical boost, you're pairing neurotransmitter support with structural brain training at the same time. So you're not just improving focus in the moment, you're training the systems that actually generate focus. And there's another reason I often recommend racket sports, especially for children and adults with ADHD. From a neurological and safety perspective, these sports are non-contact. That means there's very little risk of head injury or repeated concussive impacts. That's not something we can say for all sports. Contact sports like football, for example, carry a much higher risk of head trauma, And we know that repeated head impacts can negatively affect attention, emotional regulation, and long-term brain health, especially in developing brains. With racket sports, you get coordination training, executive function support, aerobic movement, and dopamine regulation without putting the brain at unnecessary risk. From a medical standpoint, this makes racket sports a very brain healthy, low risk option for people with ADHD, both short term and long term. There's also a social and fun component here that matters more than most people realize. ADHD brains are driven by engagement, novelty, and enjoyment. When movement is fun, people are more likely to actually stick with it. When it's social, motivation improves. And consistency is what drives meaningful change in the brain. This brings us to neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity simply means the brain's ability to adapt and change based on repeated use. The brain strengthens the circuits you ask it to use most often, and the cerebellum is one of the most plastic regions of the brain. When you consistently challenge it with coordination-based movement, its structure, efficiency, and connectivity can improve over time, even in adults. So no, you're not stuck with the brain you started with. With the right kind of training, cerebellar function can improve, frontal lobe demand can decrease, and focus can become more sustainable. That's why racket sports are such a powerful tool for ADHD. They're not just exercise, they're coordination training, executive function support, dopamine regulation, social engagement, and neuroplastic brain training all rolled into one. If you're looking for a way to support your brain that doesn't feel like just another chore, this is one of the most effective places to start. If you found this video helpful, consider subscribing for more evidence-based ADHD content.